Hey there, sports history fans. Arnie Chapman here from the Sports History Network to share with you an awesome announcement. Now dig on this. 4 of our amazing podcasts have clinched spots in the final round of the Sports Podcast Awards, and we need your support to take home the trophy. First up, we've got Basketball History 101 driving the lane in the Best Basketball category. Then on deck, we've got Orville Mulligan Sports Writer. He's cracking up the competition in the Best Sports Comedy category. Marty's Illegal Stick is dominating the ice next in the Best Hockey category. And last but not least, we have Wrestling with Heels on powerbombing its way to victory in the Best Wrestling category. Now, again, we're counting on you to cast your vote and help out these incredible podcasters secure their well-deserved recognition. It's super easy. All you gotta do is head over to the dedicated landing page. That's at sportshistorynetwork.com/vote. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/vote. Now, let's take another look at sports yesteryear with this episode brought to you by, of course, the Sports History Network.
We have a great opportunity to look back at one of the great teams in college football history, the 1963 Navy Midshipmen, and we have 2 guest experts on today to tell us all about this fantastic team, their special quarterback, and a time in America when the nation needed some heroes and a special story on the gridiron. It's all coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to another trip back in time. And what do you need to go back in time? You need to have a friend on your Rolodex that's a time traveler, and we have that. Our good friend Len Furman, the sports time traveler, joins us once again to talk about a really special team from the gridiron history. Len, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Thank you so much, Darren, for having me back again. I really enjoyed it here the first time.
Yeah, and Len, you got some help today. You brought your muscle with you to talk about this team, and an expert. You have 2 experts on here telling me about this great story. And I'll let you introduce our special guest.
Well, first, let me describe what I do. So I call myself the sports time traveler. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. I go back in time virtually through newspaper archives and videos and experience great sporting events from the past as if they're happening now. I typically go back exactly 50 or 60 years. And Greg is one of my oldest friends and one of my biggest readers. And he told me early in the fall, Len, you got to go back to 1963. It'll be exactly 60 years ago, and follow the Navy football team from 1963. It's going to be a really special year. So I was really excited to do that. And especially because it was my friend's suggestion. And Greg's got a big tie-in to the Navy. Greg, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us about your experience?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Greg McGiffney. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1985. And I grew up basically with Navy football. That was my favorite football team for a lot of reasons. One, just you got to pick a team back there, and there's only one college game on any given Saturday. So Navy was on a lot. And, I just kind of fell in love with the Navy team. And, there was a tie-in too, because during the 1970s, you might remember a guy named Roger Staubach, who played football for the Dallas Cowboys. But he was a Naval Academy graduate, a Heisman Trophy winner. And he was kind of a legendary Navy football player. And so with all that said, I just followed Navy football, loved Navy football as a kid. And then that kind of made me, I said, I want to go to the Naval Academy because that's a great football tradition, great team. I want to be part of this. I want to be part of the Navy tradition. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I just said, I want to do that. And eventually I applied and got in after, really thinking about what you have to do. But at the time it was like, oh, Navy football, they play Notre Dame, they play Army, they're on TV. This is great. And everybody's, yelling and screaming and having a great time at these games. So it's just one of those things you want to be part of, I guess, growing up. Everybody picks a team. And I think a lot of maybe young kids pick colleges because of who they like in football and college. I don't know. But at the time, that's what I did. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Well, Greg, we certainly welcome you to the Pigpen, and thank you very much for your service and for all those out there listening that have served our country and protected our freedom. We really thank you for that. And this really puts an interesting twist on it. I love that we have a Navy guy talking about a Navy team here with the Sports Time Traveler and here in Pigskin Dispatch. So I'm going to hand the reins over to Len to sort of narrate us through the story of this 1963 Navy team. And of course, we'll get the expert analysis by Greg here to share it. And I'll have some questions along the way. So let's start this journey back to 1963.
So I started following the 1963 Navy team. I didn't know much about them. I was really interested and surprised when I found out they had Roger Staubach, and it was his junior year. Everybody knows Staubach from the Cowboys, but as Greg pointed out, he played for Navy, and I didn't realize that. And the year before, in 1962, Staubach's sophomore year, they were just a so-so team. They were only 5-5, so there wasn't really high expectations. But they started out the season with two big victories over, marginal teams. But then their third game of the season, they go into Michigan, and they beat Michigan pretty badly. And so that was indication there might be something special going on. And Staubach was brilliant. The Navy coach, the Michigan coach, Bump Elliott, who had been an All-American player himself, said after that game he thought Staubach was the best football player he'd ever seen. So Staubach is starting to get some real national attention. Their fourth game, very interesting for later in our story, they go to the Cotton Bowl in Dallas to play SMU. And they lose that game 32-28. But they lose the game when on the last play of the game, Staubach had driven them something like 70 or 80 yards in the last couple of minutes. And last play of the game, he throws into the end zone. And the wide receiver in the newspaper archives, I've read several accounts, either dropped the ball or juggled the ball and it dropped, or whatever it is, he dropped the ball in the end zone. If he catches the ball as time's running out, they win the game. They would have been 4-0. But then the next week, they beat VMI. They go to 4-1. And then they play Pitt. And this is a big game. It's at Navy. And they have the largest crowd in the history of the stadium there. Pitt is ranked number 3 in the country at that time. Navy, after their 4-1 start, is now ranked 10th. And they destroy Pitt. And that really puts them on the map. Suddenly now they're recognized by Sports Illustrated as the top team in the East, and they get up to 4th in the rankings. And then they go into Notre Dame, and even though Notre Dame's not the greatest team, it's still pretty daunting to go into Notre Dame. And Notre Dame had already beaten USC and UCLA at home, and Navy is able to manhandle Notre Dame. So they're really onto a very special season, and Staubach is getting incredible press. In fact, I want to read something that I found in the New York Times about Staubach. So Allison Danzig, you may have heard that name. He was a great sports writer for the New York Times for over 40 years. He was covering football in the 1920s. And so he writes about Staubach after the Notre Dame game. His unruffled poise before the rush of the enemy linemen, the cleverness with which he casually evades their fierce embrace, and the discernment with which he at long last finds his receivers or picks up blockers have baffled opponents and amazed onlookers game after game. He is a law unto himself and he has been given a latitude in doing the unorthodox that is seldom permitted a player. I mean, this is really it's really incredible stuff. And if you ever get a chance to watch videos of Staubach playing in 1963, he really it's true to what Danzig says. He clearly is doing things you don't expect to see quarterbacks do. The way he evades rushers and is able to hit his wide receivers, and he's also a big threat in rushing as well. And so he's having this incredibly special season. And then,
but Glenn, if I could interject here real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
On your Sports Time Traveler, your blog post, and we'll put the links to that in the show notes of this podcast. Len has an embed of one of the games. I believe it's the Texas game. You have a video of on YouTube that you can watch the game, so you can see some of Staubach and his teammates, just how special these guys were. So I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah, you can see actually the entire Army-Navy game, which we're going to get to in a minute, and you can see extended clips of the when they played Texas. But so along the way, they kept rising, they keep winning, they keep rising in the rankings. They make it to number 2. And by mid-November, it becomes very apparent that there's nothing in the way of Navy not making it to a showdown in the Cotton Bowl with number 1 Texas, which is Texas is undefeated. The only thing that could possibly be in their way would be Army. And so this brings us to around the 3rd week in November. And I want to give Greg a chance to talk. So, Greg, do you want to tell us what happens in the 3rd week in November, 1963?
Well, if you remember history at all, and you remember the times we were in the early 1960s, President was JFK, and he went to Dallas, as you call, in the 3rd week of November, in 1963, and he was very much involved in, let's say, local Texas politics, as well as having a lot of Texans around him, so to speak, John Connolly and LBJ, of course. So as you remember, he went down to Texas at that time, and unfortunately, we know what happened with his assassination. It was a terrible time for the country, and whether or not you were a fan of Kennedy or his politics or anything else, the country was stunned. He was an innovative, leader. He was, he got us through the missile crisis, and he was basically looking at the 64 election for re-election, and he's, collecting, receipts, so to speak, and trying to build his popularity and everything else. So, that shock hit the world. And of course, right after that, it was supposed to be the Army-Navy game. And it usually was played at the end of November. And so most of the world in football leagues and everybody else, except for one league, I will not name that league necessarily, but one league played their games that weekend, but colleges mostly and another professional league did not play games. They took the week off to mourn because their official day of mourning that, the next day after the weekend, and it goes on from there. So the Army-Navy game was postponed. Navy had a break, Army had a break. And so Army, being still a good team and a legacy from the 50s, you remember the Pete Dawkins team and everything else, they were a big time team in the 50s, and they're off they go to play Army-Navy, a very big game. Army could upset Navy. Army's ranking was, I think, top 10 at the time. If not, they were close to it, and they were a very, very good team. And as you might not know, or people might not know, JFK, although he went to Harvard, remember, and growing up, I remember PT 109. JFK was a naval hero. PT 109, he went through that, and that was on people's mind. People knew that. Oh yeah, Kennedy was a World War II hero, a legitimate hero, a Navy guy. And I guess JFK probably adopted Navy as his football team because he went to a lot of important Navy games, including the Orange Bowl, where Joe Bellino played that game. And then, He went to Army Navy games as president. He was always there. He made it a point to be there. And he was probably Navy's biggest presidential football fan. I mean, remember Ike Eisenhower? He was an Army guy. He's a West Point guy. So in the 50s, there was Ike and West Point. Now in the 60s, you had Navy and Kennedy. It's kind of a neat thing. But Kennedy really was a big Navy football fan. And not many people know that. And this year they played the game, actually, the 60th anniversary in Massachusetts, and not a word about Kennedy, which boggled my mind. But still, it was a big deal, and a big deal to me because I knew how much Kennedy was a football fan for Navy, and it was very meaningful. And so it goes. But the game ended up being played on December 7th, later that year in Philadelphia at the old Memorial Stadium. And so that game was played on Pearl Harbor Day, and Pearl Harbor was a big thing back then, and so on. And it was I guess the only game going at that time, and it was national. I guess it was nationally televised. I guess it was a big deal, and everybody's watching it, and there's 100,000 people there, and there's JFK, or would have been JFK, except his memory and the whole country was, still mourning. So anyway, that game, happened, and Len, you can tell them, why don't you tell the world about what happened that game, because that was one of the best games and best stories of Navy football in probably to that day.
Yeah, I'll talk about the game itself in a minute, but I just want to reinforce some of the things Greg was saying about JFK being a huge Navy fan. This is one of the things. This is kind of the key part of the story that I wanted to make sure we get through. We describe here, because it was something I didn't know, and the tie-in between JFK and the Navy team here is really something special. He was a really diehard Navy football fan. As Greg mentioned, when he was president-elect in 1961, he made it a point to go to the Orange Bowl game to root for Navy, and he was there in Philadelphia at the Army Navy game in 61 and 62, and he made it known he was very much looking forward to going to this Army Navy game. It was supposed to be played on November 30th. He even had a plan that he was going to sit on the, he recognized as commander in chief, he has to look at least a little impartial. So his plan was that he was going to sit on the Army side in the first half and the Navy side in the second half. And he planned it out that way because he wanted to be on the Navy side when they won the game. And he knew, as being a big football fan in general, his whole family was always football fans. Being a big football fan in general, he obviously knew that if Navy won the game, they were going to get invited to the Cotton Bowl. Texas was the top team in the country. They had already finished an undefeated season, and Texas was going to the Cotton Bowl as number one. And if Navy won, they were going to get the invite and be there as the number two team. Now, the interesting thing is that up to this point in college football history, only one other time has a number one and number two team met in a postseason bowl game. So this was going to be a really special game, and some evidence that JFK was planning on, kind of knew this and was planning around it is I just uncovered, as I was writing my article about the Cotton Bowl game last week, that when Kennedy was in Dallas on November 22nd, the plan, the open air motorcade he was in, they were going to the Dallas Trade Mart. He was going to be delivering a speech. As soon as that speech was over, he was going back to the airport. Air Force One was going to fly him to Austin. And in Austin, he was planning to go see the University of Texas football practice. He was going to be at their practice. That practice never took place. It was canceled, obviously. And he even had a joke prepared in his speech there, where he says something to the extent that we all would like to see a Navy-Texas game. And if I can do something about it, I will. But I know you guys don't like a lot of federal intervention. So that was his little joke he was going to make in Austin that day. So that's kind of proof to me that he was really following this. He was definitely going to the Army Navy game, and he was looking forward to that win so he could go to the Cotton Bowl game. So this really got to me, that JFK had such passion for football and wanted to go see these games. Now, the Army-Navy game, it turned out to be a great game. It was a classic case of powerhouse offense versus great defense. Army had a great defense, and Army took the lead 7-0. Then Staubach did his magic, and with 10 minutes to go in the game, Navy's up 21-7. And then something strange happened. Navy never got the ball back. Army comes down and scores, and they make a 2-point conversion. And now it's 21-15 with 6 minutes to go. Now, Army's quarterback was a guy named Stickwell. And they also, as a lot of players did back in those days, as you know, Darren, they played on more than just one team. So Stickwell also played special teams. And Army kicks off. Stick was there on special teams. Stickwell recovers the onside kick. So Army gets the ball back, and then with 6 minutes to go, he drives them down, he drives them downfield with 1:37 to go. They've got 1st and goal on the Navy 7, and they had driven for a touchdown already. They're driving down again. It looks like nothing's going to be able to stop them, and then Navy they get about a couple of yards on 2nd down. They get a couple of yards on 1st down. They get a couple of yards on 2nd down. Now it's 3rd and 3, and Army has no timeouts left. But the crowd, and I can't really imagine this. It's an open air stadium. The old what I heard what was called JFK Stadium when I was growing up. It's not JFK Stadium yet at that point. It's just Philadelphia Stadium or Memorial Stadium. There's 102,000 people there. It's so loud that the Army players can't hear Stickwell's call. This is something kind of incredible sounding to me. But at that time, and I don't know if it's still in place, there was a rule that if the crowd was so loud that the quarterback signals couldn't be heard by his own players, that he could call an official time. He could turn to the official and call time. And he does this a couple of times. He does it on 2nd down, and then he tries to do it again on 3rd down. But what Stickwell doesn't realize, apparently, is, yes, they're going to give him this official time to momentarily stop the game. But then they're going to start the clock again. And so, unbeknownst to Stickwell, the clock starts again, and time runs out. Time runs out on 3rd and goal, and Navy and Army didn't get another play. So Navy barely escaped, but they won the game. They retained their number 2 ranking, and they were invited to the Cotton Bowl.
Wow. And they're probably wiping their brows, all the sweat off their brows, all the fans, because that's got to be an edge of your seat moment, those last 6 minutes. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, so they recover the onside kick, and there's 6 minutes left, and they tick off 4.5 minutes and go, 40 yards? That's incredible.
Yes.
There must have been a bunch of 2-yard gains or something the whole way down there.
Well, they were, mostly a running team. So they were just grinding out yardage, and Navy wasn't able to stop them.
That's the old 4-minute offense. You're trying to run the clock out. You see a lot of, all of a sudden, NFL teams right on Sunday, they're winning, and all of a sudden, hey, we're going to run the clock out, right? We're going to try to get 1st downs and matriculate the ball downfield kind of very slowly and succinctly, and not throw a lot of passes. So that was the strategy, and it probably would have worked or should have worked, except you had some crowd stuff, and the 12th man showed up and definitely helped the Navy team this time around.
Yeah. And Len, to answer your question, I think that rule is still in place. And if you think back like 15, 20 years ago, there were NFL teams that were trying to do that, but the quarterbacks were finding, they got the pause and the officials would stop the game. Not only would the clock restart, but the crowd would say, hey, this is bugging that QB. Let's get louder and let's really get in his face. So I think they just sort of ignore it and they go to the silent counts to get by that. But yeah, great story though, guys. That really puts me back into the moment there. I really appreciate that.
So then
Yeah, go ahead. We'll continue with our 1963 story of Navy.
Yeah, so then they've got 3 weeks to get ready for the Cotton Bowl game, which is on New Year's Day, and the irony of this is that the Cotton Bowl obviously is in Dallas. So here JFK, it's pretty certain he would have gone to Dallas 6 weeks after his first visit to Dallas. He would have gone back there to watch the Cotton Bowl game. It's pretty much a certainty. In fact, the reason I'm so certain is I had this hypothesis, and then I came across a book that's all about the 1963 Army-Navy game and JFK. So a guy named Michael Connolly, who writes a lot of great sports books, he wrote a book just about that game and the time with JFK, the Army-Navy game. So I was able to contact him, and I said, "Do you think JFK? I think JFK would have gone to the Cotton Bowl. What do you think?" He said he definitely would have gone to the Cotton Bowl game, and he pointed out that the whole rivalry with LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was from Texas, so he was Kennedy's vice president. So that was another contributing factor that he certainly would have gone there to the Cotton Bowl game. And in fact, LBJ didn't end up going to the Cotton Bowl game himself, but he actually sent his daughter to the game. So it's really it's what really got to me is a lot of people focus on the Kennedy assassination. Here we are 60 years later, and the actor and director Rob Reiner is producing a major podcast now where he's saying, "I've solved the Kennedy assassination. It's a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy, and here's all the evidence." I haven't listened to the podcast, but this is a big thing right now. And it's occurred to me as I was researching this and kind of experiencing this, that we've kind of dehumanized Kennedy over the last 60 years, just focusing on the conspiracy theories around the assassination. We forget that this was a person who had, dreams and aspirations. And one of his big dreams was to go to this Cotton Bowl game and see number 2 Navy. And, the whole time he's been following Navy, they have never reached number 2. They had not been this high in the rankings since the war. As you probably know, in 1944 and 45, Army and Navy were the top 2 teams in the country, and the Army-Navy game decided the national champion basically in 44 and 45, with Army winning both of those games and going undefeated. So this was Navy's chance to win a national title. They had not been in contention for a national title since they had lost to Army in 1945. I mean, this would have been one of the high points of Kennedy's life, going as president to the Cotton Bowl to watch them possibly win a national championship. And I have to believe that, and Greg, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd have to believe that, the motivation of knowing that you got the president pulling for you would have been a big deal.
I absolutely believe it would have happened. That's everything I knew about Kennedy and the Navy football team, being a graduate, of course, and having gone there, and just know the whole story behind it and what Kennedy was all about. I have no doubt he would have gave the guys a pep talk, either in Annapolis, which is not far from Washington, obviously, or at the game. I have no doubt in my mind Kennedy would have give them a pep talk, and they would have probably responded very well to that. Just because I know he was pretty beloved, and it's just, like I said, it's a shame we don't realize that nowadays. But in that era, Kennedy and Navy were a kind of a thing, and like I say, he was a naval hero. He wanted to be associated with the Navy very much so, and I think he was probably our best fan and definitely the best fan as far as commander-in-chief we ever had, even probably better than Jimmy Carter, I'm gonna guarantee, because he really loved the team. He wanted to be part of the team. He wanted to be part of Navy football, and he went to every Army. He made it a point. I'm gonna be there. I like Navy. Harvard guy liking Navy. Who knew? But hey, that's the way it went, and it was just such a great time in Navy football history. That team was just incredible, and to think they could have beat a very good Texas team that was probably one of the history's best teams ever. They were really good. It just makes me think, gosh, that was a great season for Navy and the Naval Academy. So I just wish I could have seen it myself. I was too young probably to do that, of course, but that would have been an incredible time to be there.
I'm sure it was. Now, is it too presumptuous for me to say, maybe either one of you can answer this? Now, 60 years ago, we think of today, Air Force One is flying probably every day, probably flying almost like a commercial jet going all over the place. But back in 1963, air travel's probably not as prevalent as today. And so for a president to be going, basically Thanksgiving being Texas, going back to Washington, going to Philadelphia, going back to Texas within a month's time, that's probably quite a bit of travel, even for the president of the United States in that time, isn't it?
I think Air Force One was flying. The average person was not flying all over the place like they are now. The volume of passenger air traffic was, a fraction of what it is today. But jet travel, we were in the jet travel age by the late 50s, and Air Force One was flying all over the place. In fact, the morning of the assassination, Kennedy woke up in Fort Worth, and they flew Air Force One from Fort Worth to Dallas, 10 minutes. So they didn't think anything of just flying Air Force One all over the place back then. But one of the things that I want to bring up also is how the assassination affected the Navy team, and maybe this is something, Greg, that you can talk to, how it would have impacted people in the armed forces more than the average person.
Well, I think Kennedy was a beloved figure. I mean, I still think of him in high regard as far as a lot of things related to that in that era. And there was a lot of turbulence, I guess, underlying turbulence politically in the world at that time. And you got to remember, Kennedy went to Dallas in November of '63 because he was effectively starting his campaign for re-election. And there's no doubt about that. That's documented. That's why he was going there. It was to campaign. And so, he would have probably been going, a lot of places throughout the country, but Texas to him was a big deal. And I think he thought he had to win Texas to win re-election. I think it was that he thought it was probably be close again, just like it was against Nixon in '60. And it didn't end up being that way in '64, but he thought it was going to be. And he was definitely putting down markers to appeal to and to be part of and to be visible in these locations. So I got to think he was, looking at football maybe as a way that, he could relate to people, which was pretty cool. And again, Kennedy was a naval hero. Kennedy was someone that I think midshipmen and the Naval Academy looked up to or had in high regard. I think when I was there, I think he was in high regard. I think people still remember, Kennedy was a fan. And, we heard all the stories from the past, and, that Roger Staubach related to that too, because he was, NFL here, superstar. So I think there's still a lot of that going on, and people remembered that, and it kind of got farther and further away now. But at the time, it was a very big deal. And I think, I think it really must have really affected the team, because I think they thought him as one of them. I really did, even though he didn't go there per se. He was a Navy guy who went to war just like they were going to go eventually. And he was probably the closest thing they had to a president that they could relate to.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the point I wanted to make is that I think not only did they lose this potential motivation by not having Kennedy there, by losing Kennedy the way they did, it really deflated the team. And the Cotton Bowl game on New Year's Day 1964 does not go very well for Navy. What happens is, and I wanted to get to the game itself, Texas, like Army, was very much a defensive-oriented, rushing team on offense. They hardly threw the ball. Duke Carlisle, their quarterback, had only thrown for 400 yards passing the entire season in 1963. And so they kind of catch Navy a little blindsided because they come in with a whole new strategy where they're going to throw. And they throw 2 touchdown passes early in the game. It's 14-0 early on. And another thing they did, very smart on their part, they apparently knew that the one of the Texas defensive backs, Pat Donnelly, who also doubled as a halfback, so another two-way player, Pat Donnelly had a hamstring injury, and so they threw in Donnelly's direction on 2 long bombs that they converted for touchdowns. And if you look at and you can see this in my Substack article, you can see the videos where Donnelly is just not able to keep up with the Texas wide receiver, and Texas scores these 2 early touchdowns, and that really was an early nail in the coffin. And Texas ends up going up 28-0 in the second half, and Staubach finally runs one in, and it's 28-6 was the final score. Another interesting kind of side note is so Duke Carlisle, who threw for just over 400 yards all season, he breaks the Cotton Bowl record. By the third quarter, he breaks the Cotton Bowl record for passing yards in a game with something like 213. And then Staubach breaks the record in the fourth quarter. So Staubach ended up passing for 228 yards in that game, and that became the Cotton Bowl record. So the record's broken by both quarterbacks in the same game.
Wow.
So it doesn't end well for Navy, losing 28-6 in the Cotton Bowl. But I have to believe that if Kennedy had lived and was able to go to Dallas 6 weeks after that initial trip, that things could have been very different.
Yeah, wow. That's definitely a good point, and something we'll never know. But very interesting that both quarterbacks broke the record of the Cotton Bowl. Just tells you how badly each team wanted to win, or at least the quarterback's play was indicative of that. So very interesting indeed. Now, do we have any final notes on that? Where did Navy end up? Did they end up ranked number 2 for the final polls? Or
well, so here's the interesting thing. So back in those days, the final polls came out before the bowl games. Bowl games were really viewed as more like exhibition games. So officially, Texas won the national championship like 3 weeks earlier when the final poll came out around a little after the Army-Navy game. So around December 10th or 12th, the final poll came out, and Texas was 1, Navy was 2. And that's why I call it a de facto. The game was like a de facto national championship. It wasn't really the true national championship. But if Navy would have beaten Texas, it'd be hard to say, well, Navy wasn't really the national champion. But the official national champion had already been decided. And by the way, it's very interesting to note, it was the first ever national title for Texas. And Navy has never won a national title.
Interesting. And how about you, Greg? Do you have any final things to wrap up on our 1963 Navy team?
Well, like Lynn said, it was a disappointing thing all around, but bowl games were a really big deal until, very recently, I think, and there's so many of them, but back then there weren't that many. So it was a pretty big deal to have Navy go to the Cotton Bowl or Navy went to the Orange Bowl. I mean, there weren't that many bowls. And if you go to a bowl game, you got to be a pretty good team. And so I think there was a lot of, maybe I won't say hype, but definitely interest in bowl games, and people took them seriously as far as, who beat who and what happened in a bowl game. And like today you have opt-outs and embarrassments and things like that. Now the playoff is different now. It's more interesting, but still, I think college football was a little bit different then. There were fewer games, and these one-off games, were that you had nationally televised or were televised, or even radio broadcasts were a very big deal. And I just had one additional postscript about Roger Staubach. Where he ended up playing in his professional career at first. It was the Cotton Bowl. He played for the Dallas Cowboys. He played in the Cotton Bowl, then they moved to Texas Stadium later on. But He ended up playing home games at the Cotton Bowl, and Roger Staubach, recovered from this defeat, obviously, because he became the first Dallas Cowboys quarterback to win the Super Bowl in Super Bowl VI. So he actually was Dallas's first, Super Bowl champion quarterback, and they came close many times to winning NFL championships and the Ice Bowl. And then the Super Bowl V was kind of a debacle. It was kind of they call it the Blunder Bowl, and the Cowboys lost. But Super Bowl VI, Roger Staubach became the starting quarterback just before that in that season, and he became the Super Bowl winning quarterback, the first one for Dallas, and of course a Hall of Famer down the road with many accolades. And he ended up living in Dallas after that. So it kind of went full circle for him. But certainly, Dallas was a certain place, and at the time of the Cotton Bowl, you realize Dallas, Roger Staubach was going to be in the Navy. He wasn't going to play professional football right away for a number of years, and lo and behold, he came back to play for Dallas. So I just thought that was kind of a karmic thing in a lot of ways, that here comes Staubach, and look where he is, and as a Dallas Cowboys, Hall of Famer. So
yeah,
anyway.
Good point on the irony. Now he lost 2 games in the Cotton Bowl that year, right? He lost SMU and Texas. So
he did not have good luck in the Cotton Bowl, but as a professional, he had a lot better luck.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, guys, that is a excellent story, and I thank you for sharing and bringing light into memories to this 1963 team and the greatness that was, and some really important moments in American history too, of the country losing our leader very tragically, and and how the country responded and how football responded. And a lot of people look to things like football, the entertainment, to sort of take their minds off of it. And I think it probably put a lot of people at ease, knowing that the Army-Navy game and the bowl games were being played and life could go on, even though we lost such an important figure in world history at the time. And gentlemen, I really want to thank you again for joining us and, writing about this, Len, and, commenting and sharing it with us here today on Pigskin Dispatch.
Thank you for writing this, Len. It was one of the best things I've ever read. So thank you for following Navy football. It was tremendous.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Darren. It was great being here.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network. Do you wish you knew more about the 100 seasons of the NFL? You're in luck, because you found the Football History Dude podcast, where each episode is a journey back in time to learn about the rich history of the NFL. From the founding of the league in an auto showroom, all the way to what it is today, America's favorite sport and a behemoth of an industry. My name is Arnie Chapman. Football is my passion, and I want you to come along with me each week to explore the yesteryear of the gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour. How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.